they actually say that the Earth is not perfectly round. And due to the Earth constantly rotating on its axis, that it's actually taken on the shape of an oblate spheroid. And this is actually the official, scientifically sound shape of the Earth. Not round, not spherical, but an oblate spheroid, bulging out at the equator and flattened out at the poles.
Earth, we know it spins once a day. Yes, thank you. 3 people know how long a day lasts here.
Good for row number 2. They're off to a great start.
So you spin, when you spin pizza dough, it kind of flattens out.
Yeah.
Gets wider in the middle. And so Earth, throughout its life, even when it formed, it was spinning. And it got a little wider at the equator than it does at the poles. So it's not actually a sphere. It's oblate. And officially it's an oblate spheroid. That's what we call it. But not only that, it's slightly wider below the equator than above the equator.
A little chubbier.
A little chubbier.
Yeah.
Chubby's a good way. It's like pear-shaped.
Yeah.
So yeah, because of the Earth's continuous rotation, they say it's taken on this oblate spheroid shape. So it's not perfectly round. Not that perfect sphere that, we've been accustomed to envision it as. And again, they say it's literally bulging out on the sides at the equator and somewhat pressed down and flattened out at the top and the bottom at the poles. Because over the years, as they've been able to study the Earth more, they've also been able to better understand all the dynamics and ultimately its shape. And they've been able to narrow shape of the Earth down to an oblate spheroid, kind of pear-shaped, but more like an Asian pear. Again, flat at the top and round on the sides, which, if this is the true composition of the Earth and actual shape that the Earth is forming, then it would bring a lot of this into perspective. Because if you look at the word oblate, it does partially mean flattened at the poles, but it can also refer to a sphere-like object that is depressed at the poles. Literally, the term oblate is referring to a spheroid that is both flattened and depressed on both ends. And now when something is depressed, we're literally talking about something that is being pressed down, pressed in, and in some cases being so pressed in that it actually ends up being hollow. But if the Earth is actually depressed at the poles, this could explain why they are not showing us any raw, uncut images of the full Earth. Because any full, wide, untempered shots of the Earth would allow us to see those depressed sections of the Earth. And naturally, people are going to want to know, why are those areas depressed? And just how depressed are they? How far depressed into the Earth are they? But there's a chance that we've seen it already. In 1966, a weather satellite called ESA 3 was launched about 750 miles above the Earth. And this satellite actually took overhead photographs of the Earth from where it was positioned just above the South Pole. And you can actually go into the history archives and you can still see these photos. And what's interesting is that in one image, you can see the cloud cover over Antarctica. But in a second image, in the same spot, you can see what clearly looks like a giant gaping hole right in the middle of Antarctica. And when ESA 7 was launched in 1968 and placed into orbit over the North Pole, it was the same thing. What looked like a gaping circular hole in the middle of the North Pole. And after ESA 7 launched and that second photo of the North Pole was released, they ended up addressing these crazy looking dark patches in these photos because, a lot of people were really starting to question what these things were that they were looking at. And what they said was that what was causing this was a combination of the sun not reaching the Arctic Circle and the fact that the ESA satellite photos were a patching together of composite images. So because of this, the areas over the north and south poles where there's no sun are completely covered in darkness, making it look like this dark black hole in these areas. But basically, this could all be easily explained by an anomaly of lighting and photography. And of course, you got to question why they would release these images showing that the Earth is completely depressed at the poles, only to turn around and deny that that's what we're actually seeing. And we've got so many different people in the past saying that there are entrances deep into the Earth at both the North and the South poles. And there's some evidence for this because, number one, when you spin a spherical object in a constant motion at a high rate of speed, similar to the Earth's rotation, that sphere starts to flatten out at the top and the bottom and bulge out on the sides and basically becomes an oblate spheroid. And then if you put that same spherical object in a microgravity environment and you add elements into the interior of it and send it into a spinning motion at a high rate of speed, not only does it press down into more of an oblate spheroid shape, but the majority of the energy migrates toward the center and extends to both the top and the bottom of the sphere and almost creates sort of a cylindrical mass right at the center of the sphere. So if the Earth is spinning and taking on this oblate spheroid formation, you would expect to see something similar going on, but possibly on a larger scale because of all the electromagnetic activity and all the other forces acting on the planet. It would create this kind of like a torus effect where a good portion of the energy moves towards the center and extends out at the top and the bottom. And all of that energy and all that force will create cavities or holes at both the top and the bottom, at both the North and the South poles. And this could explain the logo of the United Nations and why they chose to use this specific projection of the Earth. Because, of course, we know this is an azimuthal, equidistant projection of the Earth, a flattened out view of the Earth from the perspective of the poles, a perspective of the Earth with the pole as the central point. So again, you take the spherical Earth, that three-dimensional object, and you rotate it around to focus in on the poles and make the poles the central point, in this case, Antarctica. And then from the pole, from that central point, you begin to spread that sphere out until you have the three-dimensional Earth flattened out and fully visible in a two-dimensional form. Again, with the pole as the central point. Remember, they also call this a polar projection because the pole is the number one focus on this map. And obviously in this configuration, you have the North Pole represented as the central point, with the South Pole spread out and distorted around it. But you have both poles as the main focus of this projection of the Earth. And you can do the same thing in the opposite direction. Take that two-dimensional distortion and bring it back into a sphere and move that point of focus around, all the way around, and place it on the North Pole. And from the North Pole, again, spread that sphere out until, again, you have the 3D Earth represented in a 2D form with the central focus on the poles. In this case, with Antarctica as the central point and the North Pole stretched out and distorted around it. In either case, the poles are always the center of focus. Everything is centered on the poles with this projection. And again, whether you center in on the North or the South Pole, you're taking a three-dimensional Earth, a three-dimensional object, which you're not going to be able to see all aspects of all at once. And you're spreading it out and rendering it into a two-dimensional form so that you can see all aspects of that three-dimensional object all at once in a 2D form. It is a spread out two-dimensional projection of the Earth with the poles as the central point. Remember, azimuthal meaning starting at the pole, and equidistant meaning equal distances apart. So you got the poles at equal distances apart as the central focus of this projection of the Earth. Everything is focused in on the poles. It is a full view of the Earth spread out from the perspective of the poles. Again, a polar projection. Everything is being projected from the poles. And remember what they're telling us. Earth is an oblate spheroid, rounded out at the equator and flattened out at the poles. That because of the Earth's rotation, because of that constant spinning, over time, it's become more flattened out at the poles. And again, the azimuthal equidistant projection is focused in on the poles. The poles are the central point. So the region where the Earth is more flattened out as an oblate spheroid is the central focus of this projection. So technically, this would be a flat Earth map because it's centrally focused on the flattened out region of the oblate Earth. And remember, oblate can also mean depressed or pushed in at the poles. Again, this could explain why they chose to use this specific projection for the United Nations, because this projection makes the poles the central point of focus. It centers in on the polar regions with all the countries collected around the poles. It's almost like they're letting you know the poles are the central point of focus. This isn't even the original logo. If you go back and you look at the original logo that was used in 1945 when the United Nations first formed, they literally had this central point where the pole is outlined right at the center. It's like all the lines of latitude are zeroed in on that point, on that outline of the pole. Again, it's almost like they're telling you the poles are the point of interest. The poles are the focus. What is bringing these nations together, what is uniting these nations is the poles. Whatever is at the polar regions is the central focus for these nations. Because if you look at this original logo, it's like they're literally targeting the poles. Again, it's like all the latitude and longitude lines are zeroed in on the poles, zeroed in on that central target, almost like a target grid with the point of convergence being at the poles, like a bullseye aimed at the poles. I mean, literally, if you place this thing next to a target grid, there's almost no difference. And you got the lines of latitude and longitude looking like crosshair lines that is converging in on the main target. Again, with that main target or that bullseye being the poles. Again, it's almost like they're saying the poles are the target of these nations. All the nations are uniting around this central point, around the poles.